It began not with bombs in the night, but with words that shook the world. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin stood before cameras and delivered a warning that echoed across every Western capital. Russia, he declared, is revising its nuclear doctrine, rewriting the rules of the most dangerous game on Earth. And the new version? It lowers the threshold for pressing the red button. For the first time, Russia openly stated it might use nuclear arms not only if attacked by another nuclear power, but even if struck by a non-nuclear country backed by one. In plain terms, if Ukraine fires Western-supplied long-range weapons into Russian territory, the Kremlin could treat it as if NATO itself had pulled the trigger. Suddenly, what was once theoretical is now official policy. To understand why this matters, we have to step back. Russia's nuclear doctrine was last officially updated in 2020, a carefully worded manual for the apocalypse. The language was designed to sound responsible, almost reassuring. Nuclear weapons, it said, could only be used under extreme circumstances. 1. If Russia was directly attacked with nuclear or other weapons of mass destruction. 2. If a conventional attack threatened the very existence of the state. That phrase, existence of the state, set a high bar. It implied Moscow wouldn't unleash Armageddon just because it lost a tank column or a city block. The Kremlin wanted to signal that nukes were weapons of absolute last resort. But then came the war in Ukraine, and over 2 years of grinding attrition, missile strikes, drone swarms, and Western aid shipments, the bar has shifted. In late 2024, Putin announced a revision. The new doctrine doesn't just keep the old rules, it adds new, fuzzier ones. Now, nuclear weapons may be used in response to large-scale conventional attacks, a deliberately vague phrase that covers everything from missile barrages to massive drone assaults. Even more unsettling, Moscow declared that if a non-nuclear country attacks Russia with support from a nuclear-armed ally, Russia will treat it as a joint nuclear attack. Translation: if Ukraine uses American ATAC-MS or British Storm Shadows to hit targets inside Russia, the Kremlin might classify that as if Washington or London had just gone to war. That's not legal fine print. That's a direct warning shot at NATO. Why now? Analysts point to 3 key reasons. First, deterrence. Ukraine has been begging its allies for long-range weapons to hit deep inside Russia, and some of those requests are being granted. Moscow wants to scare Western capitals into holding back. The logic is simple. If arming Ukraine risks nuclear escalation, maybe Washington and Berlin will think twice before signing the next arms package. Second, signaling. For Putin, rewriting the doctrine shows both Russians and foreigners that he is still in control, still capable of raising the stakes. It's a form of political theater, but with nuclear props. And third, strategy. Nuclear threats have been Putin's favorite lever since 2022, but up until now, they were just rhetoric. Turning that rhetoric into official doctrine makes the threat feel heavier, less like bluff, and more like policy. But here's the catch. The new doctrine is deliberately vague. What exactly counts as support from a nuclear power? Is it supplying weapons, providing satellite intelligence, funding and training? If yes, then the West has already been supporting Ukraine for years. And what qualifies as a large-scale conventional attack? 10 missiles, 100 drones, or just one strike that hits the wrong building at the wrong time? The ambiguity isn't an accident, it's part of the deterrence. By refusing to define the red lines, Moscow keeps everyone guessing, and in nuclear strategy, guessing games are dangerous. The implications are sobering. Imagine this. Ukraine uses Western-supplied missiles to strike an airbase just across the Russian border. Under the old doctrine, that's a painful hit, but nowhere near a nuclear threshold. Under the new doctrine, Russia could legally interpret it as a NATO-backed assault. Suddenly, the Kremlin has grounds, at least in its own narrative, to justify a nuclear response. And even if Moscow doesn't actually launch, the uncertainty alone ratchets tensions to levels unseen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's the entire point. This isn't just about battlefield outcomes. It's about making NATO leaders second-guess every shipment, every missile, every word of support. The international reaction has been predictably fierce. Kyiv immediately dismissed Putin's announcement as nuclear blackmail, accusing Moscow of trying to freeze Western aid through fear. NATO leaders, meanwhile, condemned the revision as destabilizing and reckless, warning that any nuclear use would bring catastrophic consequences for Russia. European leaders compared the shift to tearing up decades of arms control agreements, while nuclear experts called it a dangerous step back toward the darkest days of the Cold War. For Ukraine, though, the message is clear. Putin is trying to weaponize fear itself, hoping that the threat of escalation will do what his army has struggled to achieve on the battlefield. There's also a new wrinkle: Belarus. The revised doctrine extends Russia's nuclear umbrella to cover its closest ally, where Moscow has already stationed tactical nuclear weapons. This effectively pushes the nuclear standoff deeper into Europe, right up to the borders of Poland, Lithuania, and NATO's eastern flank. For Western strategists, that's not just alarming, it's complicating. Every NATO troop movement, every defense drill near Belarus now has to be weighed against the possibility of being branded a nuclear trigger. And then there's the economics of fear. Nuclear weapons aren't designed for everyday use. They're designed to shape decisions without ever being launched. By lowering the threshold, Russia is saying every Western shipment, every Ukrainian missile strike, every drone swarm could be the one that tips us over the edge. It's a bluff that costs Moscow nothing, but forces the West to spend billions on countermeasures, missile defense, and deterrence planning. Think of it as poker with nuclear chips. Russia doesn't have to play every hand. It just has to make everyone else nervous enough to fold. But is this credible? That's the million-dollar question. Nuclear threats have been Putin's go-to move since the invasion began, and so far, he's never pulled the trigger. Many experts believe Russia understands that using a nuclear weapon, even a small tactical one, would bring catastrophic retaliation and isolate Moscow completely. Yet credibility isn't just about likelihood, it's about possibility. Even if the chances are slim, the mere existence of new, vague rules raises the risk of miscalculation. One misinterpreted strike, one accident, one leader misreading the other's intentions, and suddenly the world is closer to nuclear exchange than it has been in decades. So what comes next? First, watch whether Western nations allow Ukraine to use their long-range weapons against targets inside Russia. That's the most immediate flashpoint. Second, look for nuclear posturing. More drills, more deployments, and more warheads being stationed in places like Belarus. Third, pay attention to the fine print. The doctrine has been announced, but its full details remain classified. The more opaque the rules, the greater the chance someone crosses a line they didn't even know existed. In the end, Putin's nuclear warning isn't just about missiles or warheads. It's about reshaping the psychology of the entire conflict. It's about raising the stakes, sowing hesitation among allies, and reminding the world that Russia still holds the deadliest trump card of all. But the lesson is sobering. The line between conventional and nuclear war has blurred, and every step further into that gray zone increases the danger for everyone. Because when nuclear doctrine becomes a moving target, the whole world lives under a darker, shakier shadow.